Welcome to Wilder Outdoor Academy. In today's lesson, I'll teach you the basics of tracking animals in the snow. Now, as you can see, we've got some fresh snow on the ground here today, which is great for picking up animal sign. Now, why do you need to track animals? One, it's just fun, right? It's fun to know more about the environment you live in, about the animals that live near you. But also, if you've ever if you've leveled up your animal game and you are, say, hunting or trapping, this is an essential skill because you have to know where the animals are traveling. So, to get started, I'm going to give you a few principles that we'll use to guide us through this. And at the end, we will tell our very own animal story. We're going to walk a track as far as we can from beginning to end. So when people think of animal tracking, a lot of times they think specifically of footprints. What kind of footprint goes with what kind of animal? But there's a lot more to it. So animal tracking at its heart is about telling a story or learning a story. And when you find an animal track, you're coming in at a certain part of that story. And there's a story that's happened before that, and there's a story that's happened after that. So what we're going to look for is not just footprints, but we're going to look for animal sign. And the three major types of sign are going to be footprints, which are important, but there are two other ones. The second is going to be scat, or poop and pee. Wild animals have a very fast metabolism, which means they're going to the bathroom a lot, which also means that they're leaving a lot out in nature. So that'll also be a clue into what's been happening in our animal story, but also what kinds of animals we're looking at. The third thing that we'll look at is signs in sort of on plants, essentially, but anything that shows us where an animal has been feeding or where they might have been interacting with the plant, either by laying on it or rubbing up against it. So some of the common signs we'll look for are branches that are missing leaves, usually a good sign that an animal is feeding, or flat grass, that could be a bedding area. Another thing that's really common is any scrapes or rubs on bark. Now, if you've been hunting, you'll know that scrapes on tree bark is something really common with deer during the rut, but also rabbits eat bark. And if you look closely, you can see their scrapes and rubs where they are, well, not rubs, but scrapes from where they've been chewing on the bark and trying to get it off of the plant. So the last principle I want to teach you before we go into specific animal species is where to find animals. So animals tend to spend their time in what are called transition areas. What is a transition area? A transition area is an area where there's dense plant cover where animals can feel safe and protected, but also nearby there's a place where they can get food and water, and that's typically a more open area. So as you can see, I kind of live in the woods here. Right across the street there's a small forest, and in our yard there are fewer trees, but enough trees and resources for animals to come and eat and drink. So that area right there on the edge of the road is a great transition area. It's dense enough for them to feel protected and safe, but over here it's open enough for them to come in and eat. And you'll see that even in our yard there are plants that create transition areas where they can travel and feel safe, maybe under a bush or next to a bush line, and then go out and eat and still go for cover if it's not safe for any reason. So when you're looking for animals, always look for transition areas. Now, with that said, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the four most common species that you'll be able to track in the northern US. The most common species that most of us will be able to track are squirrels. And there are three kinds of squirrels that most of us will see: gray squirrels, red squirrels, and fox squirrels. Squirrels tend to live in trees, but they forage on the ground, and unlike rabbits, they're active during the day. Their tracks are distinctive because they have big hind feet that land in front of their smaller front feet. It's also important to know that their front feet tend to land parallel to each other. Rabbits, on the other hand, have front feet that land staggered. And when I say front feet, I mean the smaller feet. Squirrel tracks are also smaller than rabbit tracks, just because squirrels tend to be smaller than rabbits. Their scat is football shaped and small. They mostly eat some sort of seed or nut, and they tend to live in nests made from leaves high in trees. Cottontail rabbits are also very common throughout all the US. One reason for this is that they can reproduce every 3 weeks. Rabbits are most active at night, specifically right before dawn and right after dusk. They have big hind feet that land in front of their smaller feet, just like squirrels. But what's different is that their front feet are usually staggered, meaning that they're not next to each other, just like in this photo here. Their tracks are also bigger than squirrels. Their scat looks like marbles, small circular pellets. They tend to eat grass, twigs, and bark, and they prefer brush, wood piles, or other areas with dense, low-lying shelter to stay safe. Deer are another common and fun species that we can track. The most common are white-tailed deer. Deer tend to be active at night. They have pointed hooves with the points facing forward, so you'll always know what direction they were traveling. They tend to have a wide gait. That means they have big spaces between each step, and they often drag their feet in the snow, making lines behind them. Their scat is often small, dark brown pellets or larger clumps of those pellets. They tend to eat grass, leaves, mushrooms, and seeds, and they spend much of their time in the forest. Many of us live in places where turkeys are common. Their sign often includes large brown and black feathers. Turkeys tend to be most active during the day. Their footprints show 3 clawed toes. They also have closely spaced footprints because, well, they don't have very long legs, so there's not a lot of space between their steps. Their scat is long and cylindrical, often with a white spot at the end. Turkeys will eat almost anything, but the way they get their food is common. They'll scratch at the ground, leaving disturbances like the one seen in this picture. So I'm on a track finding mission here in my yard. Like I said, it snowed last night and there's some fresh track in my yard. In fact, not just fresh track, but all sorts of fresh sign. And what I found here are some rabbit tracks. So these are rabbit tracks. Now, how do I know that these are rabbit tracks? Well, 2 things. I see the hind feet up here. These are bigger than the front feet. And I know that rabbit tracks will have the hind feet in front of the front feet when you see the track because they hop their back legs over. And here I have the 2 front feet. I'm also more confident that this is a rabbit because, as you'll notice, the 2 back feet are separated a little bit. They're not parallel. For squirrels, those will be parallel. And rabbit tracks and squirrel tracks look similar. So if I'm still not sure, I'm going to look for other sign. What would let me know that this was a rabbit? And sure enough, I have my answer right here. These little brown pellets. This is rabbit poop. It looks like a marble, it's small, and it's all over this trail. So the questions I want to answer when I'm telling an animal story from their tracks is, where did they come from? Where did they go? And what did they do along the way? So the first question I want to answer is, what direction was the rabbit going? Now here, I know that rabbits' hind feet will be in front of the front feet in the track, which means I know that the rabbit was going this way, was traveling this way in our yard. The other interesting thing that I see is if I look just to the other side, I see another set of tracks that are going the opposite direction, which means that this animal probably came from its home, came out to find food, and went back. Now, the real question is, can I find out where it lived? Now, that might be getting ahead of myself, but again, my question is, where did it come from? Where did it go? And what did it do along the way? So let's start with, where did it come from? And to do that, I'm going to follow these tracks backwards to see where I can find the last track that's heading towards the spot I'm at. So the first thing I notice is that as I'm looking at the tracks that were leading to the trail that we found, they actually start overlapping with the tracks that show where it returned to. So it looks like it used the same path to get to and from where it was going. So where did it come from? It probably came from under that pine tree. And where did it go? Under that pine tree. So again, animals love transitions because they feel safe and they can get to food if they have sort of a close distance between the safe space and the space where there might be food. So let's test our theory and see what might be lurking under these two trees. All right, we're looking under the tree that the rabbit came from and that it probably hid under on its way back. And what I see is that there's a lot of flattened out snow, which means this rabbit hung out here for a while. There's also a lot of poop. So those two things tell me that this rabbit stayed under this tree for a little while, probably because it felt safe, either on its way to the other tree or on its way back. There's also some poop under here as well. And if you'll notice that very dark red indentation in the snow, that's rabbit pee. So this rabbit definitely spent some time under this tree. Let's go see where it went. Okay, this is the second tree, the tree that we know it went to. And if we look under here, there's a ton of poop, but none of it is in one spot, and there's no flattened out snow everywhere. In fact, there are a bunch of tracks moving around very quickly, or it looks like they're moving around very quickly because there's a lot of space in between them. So if we look here, we'll see that there are a lot of tracks, a lot of poop, but not a lot of concentration. In other words, they're not all in one spot, which means that this rabbit was moving around when it was under this tree. It didn't stay here in one spot for long, although it looks like it did spend some time under here moving around. Now, if I follow the tracks out of this tree, I see that they actually go under this bush. And I know from experience that this bush is a place where rabbits like to eat. Now, there's not a lot of sign under this bush, so I don't think it spent a lot of time here. But if we look over here, where there is sign, we will see a few things. We're gonna see broken bark. Broken bark, and if we look on the bark, we'll notice that some of the smaller limbs are missing, and the bark has been chewed off. So this animal, this rabbit, came here to eat. We can see it spent a little bit of time eating here because the snow is flattened out and there's a lot of poop there. So it looks like the rabbit went to the first tree, came to the second tree, and then came under here, ate some bark. And since there aren't any tracks leading out from this, actually I shouldn't say a tree, this bush, I think that the rabbit followed itself back through that route and up somewhere else. Well, since we have tracks that lead to and away from this spot, I think we might be able to track it to its den. Let's try. Well, I ran into a little bit of a problem when I tried to track that rabbit back to its den. It turns out there are a lot of rabbits in this area and lots of tracks. So, I can't be certain where this specific rabbit went, but what I could do is continue following the tracks that I do see, and maybe I'd find one. I'll show you the general route so you can get a sense of where rabbits are and where they travel, and maybe we could have a few guesses on where it's living. So this is our first tree, and you can see there are lots of tracks that lead into and out of this tree. Most of those tracks follow this path. And as you can see, there's branches covering this path. So this is sort of a transition area for those rabbits where they can feel safe. They go up into that corner. So I have a feeling that our rabbits, knowing that cottontail rabbits like brush, might either be living across the street in the woods and they're running across the street quickly to get to cover, or there's actually a big brush pile over in my neighbor's yard where he stores some of his leftover building supplies. I have a funny feeling that some of the rabbits might be living under there as well. But regardless, we have a story for these rabbits to tell.